And so this was, with the chancellor's office for 10 years, they had to figure out what to do with his assets. Well, most of you went to universities, everything down to like. I tried to convince her. Well, Board of Education, that was so. They didn't have much money, but they had this. And Dwayne is on his way. Turn it over. Good job. Did he really have a favorite?
Yes, I did.
Oh, we don't have that. That's now. All right.
All right. Let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to call the December meeting of STEM Investment Council order. Let's do. That's right. Too much excitement in the crowd here. Lindsay, it's because you're here.
Oh, yeah. That's right.
We have a full agenda for the day, and I'd just like to welcome everyone to this session. Get some good information and updates and some progress we're making to date. Great speakers and some good information, and we need to do some work at the end of the session on kind of the plans for next year and where we need to continue to assert ourselves. So with that, let's do introductions. We do have people on the phone, but let's do introduction at the table, and then we'll get the audience.
Eric Meslow, TimberCon.
Ben Cannon, I'm the executive director of the Center for Higher Education.
Chief Education Officer.
Jim Pyro, Chair.
Mark Lewis, Chief Ed Office.
We just go around, speak up loud so people on the phone can hear it. We just go that way and around. Yeah.
Linda Wilson, IBM. Elaine Charpentier, Executive Director.
Melissa Dubois, South Metro Salem STEM.
Deb Bailey, ODE.
Tom Thompson. They're able for electro STEM person. Susan Hobbit.
Noelle Corbett, ODE. Bethany Mons, MBM.
Didn't quite hear the end. John, speak up. Okay, great. Okay, let's turn it over to our first thing in terms of education priorities. Oh, is Celeste on the phone yet? I didn't check. Dwayne is on his way. Herb could not make it.
Yeah, Herb will try to join around 10 o'clock. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about educational priorities and get an update from Lindsay on what's going on down in
Thank you, Chair Pyro. I wore a similar outfit today. I appreciate the permission not to wear
that's right,
Friday. So thank you for that. It's exciting to see the various folks in the room today, representing teachers and our corporate community, other folks that are working across education or CT. Yeah, that's great to see them. STEM Council. I do want to start my comments there with I think the important role that STEM Council continues to play, and as you have a conversation today about your further engagement as a council, not only in helping us think through how we invest in STEM, STEAM, but also how this work, as you spent with a STEM plan for the state, interacts with the other boards and commission. And toward that, it's great to have the Higher Education Coordinating Commission here today and Ben to engage in some conversation with you. I think that council has a critical role to guide us front and center as K-12 and higher ed do larger system work, and most especially as we connect better with workforce. And that's really the starting point. I think we talk today about governor's priorities. I won't walk through all of them. She remains consistent in her vision that every student graduate high school with a plan for the future. And a big component of that has been really building out opportunities for applied learning. and making sure that our students see an opportunity actually in what they learn in the classroom and a future for them. Whether that's going on to earn an advanced degree in engineering, or that's a job right out of high school. And I think we see different community needs, different individuals across the state who need people at career and college ought to be on Governor. When the governor issued her letter in October to the Education Cabinet, she had a number of specific areas of focus, not the least of which how we continue to support the building out of an integrated system, including expanding preschool opportunities for our children to get them off to the right start, make sure they're ready for kindergarten. Continued focus around high school graduation, and I think building more connectivity between our connection and commitment to equity, and to making sure that every student, all students are successful in our system with the work that we have undertaken through Measure, which has a strong focus on career-connected learning as well as dual credit opportunities, dropout prevention strategy. And what we mean by that is really thinking how those statewide plans for our African American students, for our Native students, for our English language learners, and others, really begin to see some resources that are into our school system, into our high school and secondary level to support better high school outcomes. So that's part one. How are we grading and blending those better and being systemic in that approach to ensure that all students are achieving and closing longstanding gap. The second piece, and I think this is where Ben's participation here today is particularly important, is to think more about how we are connecting STEM our higher education system and how we're helping in that transition from higher ed to workforce. And I think an opportunity for us to be more connected with our public universities, our community colleges, and to the extent that we are setting regional and statewide workforce goals, that those are connecting to those institutions and to our higher education system as well. So that's big work. I think the STEM Council has been focused on building that system, looking at what future workforce needs are going to be, and trying to further that collaboration. Our work under the governor's direction is with Mark's facilitation and the involvement of our education agency directors, is bringing a team together to come back with some recommendations to give the STEM Council to help inform that process. And we're going to be working more closely, I think, with regional workforce partners and with the state workforce board. The governor will be there this afternoon. Talk a little bit about her broader vision around workforce. Ben and I plan to be there as well. And so there's more to come in that regard. But I think that overall connectivity, our continued focus around regional coordination for our STEM hubs, for our CE networks, will remain important. But we certainly want to renew and reaffirm our commitment and to make better connections. So that's the purpose of our participation today and the work ahead. Happy to take questions or hand it over to Mr. Cannon.
I have a question. We've obviously had some great successes around the state. Programs that have been started, kids getting really hands-on learning, applied applications, but it's not systemic, as you mentioned. Have you guys sat down with Department of Education and figured out, okay, how do we take it from what we know today to kind of scale, how we get there? We got the Measure $98. We've got these various things, but still they're not systemic. And you mentioned the word systemic earlier in your conversation. And I think that's the thing we're struggling with right now. We know what works. We know where kids get exposure to CT and STEM in their curriculum with applied learning to get better outcomes. There's just no doubt about it. But it's not systemic across the entire education system. And there are pockets of excellence, but they're not widely spread. So unless the Department of Education figures out how to make it across the system, we're not going to get there, how we educate our. You guys really put your minds to that challenge?
I think that's endemic a little bit in the governor's letter in terms of directing the deputy superintendent to think about how the department is working with greater partnership, meeting the needs of our students that oftentimes can be best accomplished by leveraging partnerships, especially as we are in an environment where resources remain scarce. So we need to work on that particular piece. But in the meantime, I think there's critical opportunity there. The STEM hubs, I think, are an example of how that can come together, and we've seen the leveraging of both public resource and private resource toward that end. I would also say that the department is a critical partner in its own work leadership, most especially as we have measured funding and the connection with local school districts around their perspective. And I think that work has the potential to grow and flourish in terms of being more systemic, because we are touching all school districts. So I think that's an additional area of opportunity to think about what that work needs to look like over the next 4 years as those plans are worked out at the local level, and how regional connectivity. Thanks for the soundtrack.
Go for it.
You need a cape.
Sorry.
That's a sign I need to wrap up. But so yes, we are having conversations. The interagency process is part of that, but I would just also reinforce the fact that I think the department understands the vision, and 98 is a place where I think that can begin to launch a more systemic approach.
Great.
So do you see the STEM of the in asset, and are we going to be advocating long-term financial support for that?
We see the STEM hubs partnership consistent with the governor's advocacy this last legislative session to make sure that we didn't have an oversimplified conversation that because the voters had said, here's Measure 98 fund, that's what CT can look like going forward. It's really understanding that there is a combination that, as you said, sort of system our approach to them. So I see that as a good thing.
An easy way to get out.
Really?
That's the holidays.
One question I do have, and I asked this to Mark, since I can't help myself with this one. Clearly, Measure 98 called for CTE, money to be spent on CTE and programs to help high school graduation. But we also know that CTE and STEM have to be blended well together to be successful, so a kid isn't kind of precluded from a longer path to engineering and science. Are you kind of viewing the funding for Measure 98 to ensure that those programs have a kind of full content, if you will, so they're not just just welding by itself, but it has the integration of STEM into those programs? I feel like that's getting good traction in schools.
Yeah, I think we will have an opportunity as we get into the 2019 session as the governor prepares her budget. Directors and stakeholders to take a look at what that funding looks like forward. Obviously, there are constraints and many demands in education system and across the education system. I think precluded us from being able to.
Maybe just one more follow on that one. I'm hearing rumors out there, and I just want to try to see if we can elude those rumors, is that obviously with Measure 101 on the ballot, that could have some implications on Measure 98 funding, and I know there's some concern by school districts on the sustainability of that funding. So whatever you can do to encourage schools that this is not going to, and I know you can't guarantee anything in this world, but there is a concern that people aren't invested in CTE because they know that they start CTE, it's harder to unwind it. It takes some momentum to build that. It takes teacher preparation. Yet they're concerned that they're not investing in CTE because they're concerned the money could go away. That's a concern for all of us in the state. So we do that. Create sustainability for these programs, because I know Measure 98 isn't constitutional and it's not there all the time. We've got to figure a way to ensure the school districts that they can plan on this for their overall own planning.
Members, my name is Ben Cannon. I'm the Executive Director of the Higher Education Coordinating Commission. Very glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Mark. And I think I'm here because Lindsay and I were at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and I was maybe complaining about the challenge that I faced in supporting the commission to get greater level of advice and input and collaboration with, in particular, industry partners to help meet workforce needs. And I'm going to be disappointed if I don't get a sound.
Yeah, can you cue up the soundtrack?
Do we have a Rocky soundtrack or something?
Set a high bar. So I was, complaining or expressing frustration, and Lindsay said, "Well, we do have this thing called the STEM Council that exists in part to, provide that kind of leadership and guidance around what we're doing in education, including higher education, to support states' needs and industry and employer needs with respect to STEM." So I want to get to that, but I think I have a double challenge today because I haven't been to this commission before, and although I know this council before, and although I know many of you, I don't know how well folks really know the HEC still. So I do want to spend just a couple of minutes introducing or reintroducing our organization and commission to you. I've got a handout. I'm going to resist the temptation to hand out our featured accomplishments document. This is like hot off the press, and it's got lots of cool stuff that we have done over the last 4 years, but it's sort of like, tooting your own horn. I don't want to do that. So instead, I'm just going to pass out our, it's in draft form. Our commission actually will be hopefully adopting this at its meeting next week, but it's our sort of updated strategic framework that has mission, vision, values, and a little bit about the HEC. And then on the inside, it tries to give a sense of kind of our core areas of activity and our goals. So the action areas at the top, A, B, C, D, and then organized around some key goals, and we've got metrics associated with goals. This is really a very simple-ish overview. But just so you get a better sense of sort of who we are and what we do, we work with all parts of the post-secondary system, public and private, 2-year, 4-year, workforce training providers. We operate the state's financial aid and grant programs. But our strategic work is really organized around these categories: reporting, and we collect a lot of student data and use that to reflect kind of state and institutional and regional progress towards goals. Funding, we are the budget agency for post-secondary education in Oregon, so we work with the governor's office to present a budget for post-secondary investments, and then we administer those dollars. So we oversee the formulas that allocate dollars to our public institutions. I'll have more to say about that in a minute. Learner Pathways, we're engaged in helping build a more seamless system within post-secondary education and connected to K-12 through certain policy responsibilities that we have. And then outreach, we help connect Oregonians to post-secondary education through a mentoring program that we've sponsored, through FAFSA completion and college nights and other activities that attempt to let Oregonians know about their opportunities to invest in themselves and in the state through post-secondary education. So that's sort of in a nutshell what we do. I want to just mention a few of the highlights. I won't hand out the accomplishments document, but a few of the highlights from the last couple of years in order to give you a more maybe concrete sense. And I think it gets a little bit to the chair's question about systemic work, because we do have, as a commission, we were fortunate to be granted in law the opportunity to, I think, have a systemic and far-reaching effect on post-secondary education. So in 2014, our commission overhauled the formula for distributing about $600 million biennium to public universities. And whereas for a generation that formula had rewarded seat time, it essentially paid for student credit hours, and that was the basis of the distribution to 7 public universities. The HEC, through its administrative action, adopted new rules to award those dollars on the basis of student outcomes. There is still a seat time component, but it's a smallish one. And starting next year, the majority of the state's investments in public universities will be to incentivize and reward student completion around certificates and degrees. And the formula itself has weights to reflect both the equity imperative, so students who are underrepresented in higher education are in fact worth more to university complete, and there are within the rule there are significant additional weights for high demand degrees. So we call out STEM degrees and we overinvest, if you will, in those through the formula. So that was a systemic approach to using state dollars, in this case, as I said, about $600 million a biennium, to create incentives and supports for our public universities to invest in these higher cost but higher demand programs and degrees. The formula is very complicated, and there are other aspects of it too, including weighting for program costs, so the greater cost of delivering a STEM program, and others, the arts, for example, are also in the high cost category. Those are also funded. We launched in a very different vein. We launched, but I think also systemic, or we hope systemic. I think that we're still waiting for evidence, but we launched the Oregon Promise program. So with the support of the legislature, the leadership of the legislature, we now operate this program whereby recent high school graduates can attend community college for near tuition free and have a 2-year guarantee essentially for that education. And we've seen dramatic increases in the person who are completing their FAFSAs, their applications for federal student aid. Just looking at data last night, which suggests that, still trying to get confirmation of this, but suggests that over the past 3 years, Oregon's gone from bottom 10 state in terms of FAFSA completion to a top 10 state in terms of FAFSA completion. And that's in part a result of the power of a program like that to really galvanize college going, or at least college intention on the part of students and families. The final thing I'll mention, and it's really connected with the pathways work, is the bill the legislature passed in 2017 this year that requires our colleges and universities to align their transfer paths so that students coming from 2-year community colleges and transferring to a 4-year university don't lose credit in that process. And what many students experience today is that credit that they've accumulated at a community college doesn't transfer well to the public university of their choice. They transfer, but it transfers an elective credit. So instead of being juniors, as they expected to, having completed a associate's degree for transfer, or they transfer module, they are not. They're more than 2 years away from their 4-year degree. And so we're responsible under that bill for convening that colleges and universities to come up with the answers to that sort of persistent and pretty complicated challenge that higher ed has had for a long time, writing systems that, of course, are locally governed, faculty who are ultimately really responsible for the degree standards of for their institution, and of course the curriculum, their courses. So there's a lot of coordination work in there, but we are convening that. We feel actually very positive about the first couple months of that work. Are excited about the alignment years. So those are a few of kinds of pieces of work that we're engaged in or have accomplished. Looking ahead, and particularly with respect to this council, to the part before the meeting, I alluded to it, explain why I was here. With the under the governor's direction and leadership, and I think with significant support from and engagement from employers, including represented on my commission, there is we hear frequently about the need for our higher education programs and investments to better reflect the state's workforce needs and economic development priorities. And that's a sort of long-standing priority for the state when it comes to post-secondary education, but one that's gotten, I think, increased attention, at least by us, in part because of the letter that we received that we alluded to. So when I think about that question, I mean, it's sort of, I don't really have the answer to it, right? How do we, what can the heck do, or how should the heck impact or attempt to impact our colleges and universities, leverage the outcomes that are valuable to the employee and the future employee and the employers and help meet workforce needs. But I do know that we need to talk to industry, talk to employers, talk to workforce development experts, and get that information and get that advice. So I think I'm here again in part and look forward to continued partnership with the council because your thinking around STEM education and bringing, for many of you, a sort of employer perspective, STEM education key through 20. But for us, particularly with respect to post-secondary education, can be very valuable and help influence how the commission prepares its, for example, budget requests or takes the next step in funding formulas in order to help meet these needs. So that's one area of advice I think that we guidance that our commission would very much value from this council. Another area where we are responsible for work over the next several months in partnership with the Workforce Investment Board and Workforce Talent Development Board that we'll look at this afternoon is in setting of new goals for adult educational attainment. The state, of course, has its 40-40-20 goal. We have redefined that to focus that 40-40-20 target on young Oregonians coming up through our K-12 system. And the legislature has said, heck, and Workforce Board, go off and figure out what an appropriate set of goals for adult education are. And those should be, I think the legislation suggests that those are likely to be shorter term and more labor market sort of workforce oriented. So whereas 40-40-20 is this aspirational goal that applies to, my daughter, who's a fifth grader, high school class of 2025, for an economy that we have no idea really what it's going to look like, and we know it's, at 40 and 40 it seems to, be as good an estimate as any of what we should be preparing today's fifth graders for. But when it comes to adults, right, people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and these near-term investment opportunities the state has. We also administer federal workforce dollars. So I think there's a real question about what we ought to be doing and what those investments ought to be organized around in the near term for working age, today's working age adults. So that's a conversation that we're having. We actually kick it off in the work group next week, and any input, advice, guidance around sort of the question of adult education will be very useful. And finally, I think we're just interested in partnership around other strategies that the HEC can help to lead with respect to our post-secondary education institutions and their support for STEM. So for me, this is really just what I hope is the beginning of a deeper connection between my commission and this council. Not the start, because we've certainly been in connection through Mark, but I hope a deepening of the relationship.
I got one. Good. Actually, it's for both of you. In regards to, are there any early returns in regards to Measure 98, in regards to how much of the eyes credit? I think on a pretty because obviously we all know that the more dual credit a child gets, the more likely they're. And then the talent council that was before that council was no longer there. My understanding after the last legislative session, they received funding to finish 7 demand side. It's over in Department of It.
Well,
has it been pulled anywhere?
Yeah, so I'm happy to speak to that. So the legislation, as you said, ended the talent. So it shifted the responsibilities from the talent plan to the workforce board. It's actually the HEC staff that supports and is funded for the talent council's ongoing work via the workforce board. So we are in the process actually of selecting the contractor who will do the talent plan update and be holding a stream ramp summit where to gather and look at a lot of time existing things. In June, it's terrific, and a lot there, how much to build and how much to learn. And the conversation that I'm having today with you is one that we're having also with members of that talent council, and
It really advocated for adult education. That was the core piece.
yeah, it makes the point that 80% of the workforce of 2035 is in the workforce today, or 2030. Getting the dates wrong, but if you're trying to figure out right what we're going to do to prepare for the economy of 2030, you can't just focus on 10-year-olds, right? Because actually that workforce is in the workforce of 2030 is in the workforce today. I am so you're absolutely
good question. This is to you as well, Mark, because I actually was a representative on Talent Council. Will there be a STEM person?
That's my understanding, and I've been speaking with Karen Hummelbaugh and others about how do we look toward that coordination.
I got it very valuable to bring things back in.
I think it's called out in the legislation as a coordination with this council and not a necessarily a permanently identified seat, but talked about is how do we get more cross-pollination and coordination specifically having and regular those meetings and somebody from the workforce board to attend this.
So a question for both of you. How do you see your education involved with things like education projects? So, you got PSU, OHSU, PCC, OMSI, Alpha, collaborative, build connected innovation place here. There are opportunities for everything you were talking about, every workforce to higher ed, to K-12, to having business. And from a strategic perspective, OMSI has a statewide plan for connecting what do they do for the state. So do you see yourself being involved in that whole type of effort in some way? Is it possible to elevate that to something that's like for the state really pushing 21st century involvement with education? Or is that something there that involves how it involves?
Just had Governor had something like that. Dr. Suresh, a little bit of opportunity for God within the board. Conversations have not so far in that. But I think what are the policy and visual more certain helping.
Yeah, I say likewise. We're in investment sense and in our policy sense, we operate in a couple of ways. One is the sort of systemic fashion that I described. We think trying to figure out how to organize it statewide, leverage the best possible outcome. So we're part of setting the context, but not sort of driving specific initiatives. We do, however, at the same time operate very targeted grant programs, right? And I don't nation quadrant for years know what whether there's any way in which through the HEC's existing potential new sort of dedicated grant funding stream or in some excess. But that's a way to also support specific on the ground efforts. And then finally, I mean, I think maybe this was to what was spoke to it, just the opportunity that state leaders have, governor, especially to help elevate examples of regional coordination and collaboration that even if it's without funding or policy, just to sort of uplift that and work that. That's part of what a council like this can do. It's part of what agencies can do.
I have a question related to this post-secondary system. In the last biennium, prior to this, we had $2 million allocated to the post-secondary system to support children of color and poverty to stay in the system. Things like Oregon State's Builders Program. We had a number of grants that we put out there that have shown to be very successful in keeping the students engaged and getting them to their final degree. That funding got dropped in the last session. I think there was an assumption that the post-secondary system was going to pick that up. Did it pick it up? And is there specific funding for that activity at all the sectors?
So I will give a provisional answer and then I'll follow up if I got any part of it. So the funding, the targeted funding does not exist, from my understanding. And the work itself, I think, as a result, will, the specific, not all of that specific. I think there's a leverage some great activities.
Yeah, I'm concerned because we found every time we studied this problem, the problem is the children of color, they just don't know how to navigate the system. They need a community to support them. And it's had great success, but if we don't fund those kinds of activities, or at least ensure that the secondary system is providing that, the students are going to drop out. And we have, the numbers are pitifully poor in this area.
Last funded person activity.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
But whatever you can do to at least encourage, highlight, you've got the funding formula, which is there to give them more dollars. Now they'll all go to the programs, unfortunately, but we need the kids to stay in those programs. Retention is critical to watch, and I try to hold the universities accountable to reporting those numbers so that we get some visibility.
There's some really bright spots within the universities. The institutions have been doing it for longer, well, they into their culture, and there's the rest. And it's a shame to see us to try to reinvent the whole thing. We've got China, excellent. It takes money, and that's where it fundamentally is rock capacity.
But I think one way you could do it is you shine a light on it and look at the retention numbers, and then you can say, look, you're not getting the kind of results we're looking at from an equity perspective. I know you have an equity statement in your statement. I mean, if we're going to have better success in this area, we need to think about how we surround these kids with services so they can be successful.
I do find it awesome that everything you talked about when you I've heard now parroted by many of the president's speeches. We'll never get focus on getting students through the program in 4 years or 5. They're now talking about that. They're clearly talking about some higher value degrees. Because obviously the incentive funding model that you've set up has changed behavior. It's changing the conversation. So I applaud you guys on doing it. It takes I to be able to change institutions. And this would be another example where it's going to take I to make this a priority, and schools will dismantle very large and successful programs by any students.
The other comment I would make, and I know you can help this conversation continue, is the continuum between high school and community colleges, or make sure there are pathways there, because so often CTE programs started with no pathway to a community college. So to the extent we are spending money in Measure 98, CTE revitalization grants, which we're going to talk about later, ensuring that community colleges are having conversations with the school district about the continuum so that we ensure kids have a pathway to a degree, whether it's a AA degree or a college degree. So often everyone wants to run a program, but then there's no place for the kids to go, and the kids are lost.
I really appreciate the point. That's stressed repeatedly in state conversation about policy, especially as they're high school based or Measure 98, ACT, it has to be the service you should be college program through. So,
And I think it's Measure 98, if it stays funded, I mean, I think that could be a requirement of the application, if you will, is there a program continuation or a partnership with the community college at a minimum, maybe higher ed at the maximum, for your program to feed into?
The high value jobs on our side. I've seen some investment in the program even have to priority. Are they high dollar, limited funds?
Any other questions? First, anyone on the push list?
Yes.
Well, I want to thank you for what you're doing. I'm anxious to know when this, talked about the letter the governor sent out for the get together. You said you're build a set of recommendations. When is that, kind of the timing of that?
The governor is directed to come back for the federal budget with recommendations. And I think toward that end, I think we have a lot that has even made, but also on our STEM education. Sort of how do we see elements of that? In addition to the broader conversation where the how to try to help through our standards or requirements for creative that are sort of pathway. So I think we have that this council and
One last comment about it. One other thing you can help reinforce too, and I know we have CT coordinators out in the field, we have the STEM hubs. The more we integrate that conversation and bring them together, the stronger the alliances. And I think some of the hubs have done a really good job in that. Some aren't. And so anything you can do to encourage the CT coordinators to integrate in with the STEM hubs to really think about it as a holistic, I really appreciate it. I think some of that's happening, and we have pockets of excellence again, but more that we can do to encourage and require that to happen, I think we're better off.
I'd like to follow on that because I think part of it is language. In other words, we're bringing the two things up together all the time, and that the STEM hubs is the same effort. Then you have some areas that might be considered more C than others that might be STEM heavy, and it shouldn't matter. Thinking about both and considering that there's outcomes of either and or all of them. I don't talk about that collectively yet, but I think it helps change.
Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedules. I appreciate the work you're doing and look forward to seeing your recommendations and continue working with you. And just, we want to thank you for Mark. Mark's been absolutely outstanding in supporting our efforts. Forward thinking, he's thinking about systemic issues and, of course,
Well, thanks, Joe.
just for the heck of it.
Is there an ask with that?
Oh, by the way, it's our council filled up.
Well, we appreciate your continued leadership and helping with us think through these issues.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks. So good. Fantastic.
Okay, so we will now go to the next agenda item, which is the director's update. So Mark, you're up.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you. I'll try to keep my remarks brief, but there's a lot. We've had a bit of a pause between the last council and meeting and this one, so there's a lot that's been going on. I want to start out by really just celebrating the fact that these investments are really paying off in so many ways throughout the state at all levels. And I really think that we're on that place where, we've talked about this, where there's the go slow to go fast, right? Where the curve starts to bend in our favor in terms of really seeing the impact of the work. And this is you've seen from some of our investments the last couple of meetings, our STEM Beyond schools making huge inroads and huge influence on many of those underserved, underrepresented communities across the state. Seeing the partnerships at a local level with the STEM hubs from GoSTEM to Douglas County to Lane County, Bend, here in the metro area, partnerships really starting to strengthen and getting a lot more of that coordination happening. The Department of Education has been a phenomenal partner in this work. With Deb Bailey and Tom Thompson, who will be talking to you, who has a new role within the Department of Education, focused also on supporting the work of the regional STEM hubs. So I think the continued challenge is that it's not just me who needs to see this work, but how do we elevate these exemplars and make them much more visible to communities across the state, for them to see the fact that they can also do that kind of work, and also for our legislators to see that the human impact this is having in our communities. So I think that there's an urgent need when we look at our committee structures for a communication strategy to shed light and keep up the momentum around the work, because oftentimes the capacity at a nonprofit, the capacity at the STEM hubs, and in regions is very limited to really kind of showcase that. We've encouraged connections with media at a local level, but I think that this is an area that we need to put more time and effort into trying to have a media strategy and to work with our media partners and our industry partners to really shed light on that work. I think it's fantastic work, and we can have a virtuous cycle. The more we focus on it, the more we elevate it, I think the more we're going to see people taking it up. For those of you who were at the Business Leadership Summit on Monday, just a couple of words, because I think we should circle back at a future council meeting around that. Two big challenges as we look to the future of work, and that is the job uncertainties and job inequalities as we look to the future. Not only the impact of machine learning and artificial intelligence and robotics on a number of our career areas, but also the distribution of the opportunities that exist for those in different communities and in different demographic groups continues to be a challenge. How do we ensure that each and every student has an opportunity to access those opportunities and to see themselves as being qualified and able to take advantage of those opportunities? So that's really critical. One thing that just struck me, because in hearing the futurist Steve Brown and doing some additional research around this area, is that for me it's really kind of interesting, because we look at all the technological and the STEMish aspects, and everybody needs to really understand technology and the way it's impacting every aspect of our work. But it's also that those jobs of the future are also kind of swinging back away from the pure kind of task-specific opportunities to those areas that are going to be protected, those careers and jobs that are going to be more protected, are those things that harness what we consider to be uniquely human qualities, that ability to connect and empathize with others. So the service-oriented areas like nurse practitioners and folks who are in that kind of a service orientation, not burger flippers service orientation there, and then the creativity, problem solving, curiosity, and the impact of that in the future workforce. So that's a really interesting area that this council should address, because I think what we are in a situation and a tension around is that there's these current talent and workforce needs that are critical, and we tend to focus on that near term, but we also have to have a foot in that future and that transition and preparing people for that. And I think that that's reflected in our STEM education plan. but it's just we need to continue to be mindful of it, because if we focus too much on just the immediate workforce needs, we're going to perhaps overshoot, in terms of generating, let's say, in computer science, if we're focusing solely on coding, then I think that the danger is that if those coding jobs go to artificial intelligence, then we've now created a situation where we have a surplus of needs. I'm not saying that that's going to happen, but it's just something to be mindful of. Lindsay mentioned the cross-agency work group as a follow-up to the governor's letter, October letter, charging us with getting better alignment between the talent needs and the talent supply across our education, workforce, and economic development. That work group, we're meeting bi-weekly right now. We've got about 4 more meetings before the end of January. I'd love to send out in early January some of the work that we're doing and engage the council and others, other partners in getting feedback on that work. Many of the recommendations, I think, are already embedded within the STEM education plan, our workforce innovation and opportunity plan, our CTE state plan around the Perkins work, in our HEC strategic plan. So there's elements that are already there, and this work group will be seeking to pull them together and to make some specific recommendations to the governor and to the agencies about policy. So part of today's conversation later on, at the end of today's meeting, we'll be seeking additional ideas from you in regards to prioritization of our STEM education plan implementation. Just kind of for your information, there are 2 new STEM Council appointees who are currently being vetted by the governor's office. We're hoping to have that vetting completed by today to announce that, but that is not the case. So be looking for an email from me, hopefully in the very near future, about those 2 individuals getting more regional representation and also some representation in some of our other career sectors that are on the council. The Oregon Community Foundation had solicited proposals from our STEM hubs around career-connected learning. Those grants are currently being reviewed. All 11 current STEM hubs, and well, actually, as you'll hear, 13 current STEM hubs have applied for funding for that. Those are currently being reviewed. The positive side of that is I think that every one of our STEM hubs sees their role in ensuring that our education system are connected to the future career opportunities in the region. The Portland, the PGE Foundation has been taking a leadership role along with OBC and others to coordinate some conversations across funders groups, corporate and private philanthropy, trying to bring greater alignment to and support for CT and STEM efforts. I think that that's a fascinating and a fantastic those conversations to be having in that regard, and moving forward on the STEM funders report that came out last year. So that's great. And then finally, I had the opportunity to participate in a convening sponsored by the Lemelson Foundation back in Washington, D.C. around invention education. A number of different grantees from Oregon also participated. This is an area that I'd love to circle back with this council on in support of invention education, inventiveness, entrepreneurship through our work. I think there's a great deal of synergy that exists between their goals and what we've called out in the STEM education plan. Fabulous, very humble foundation that is really investing heavily in ensuring that that they're making an impact, and I love it that they frame some of their work around not just problem solving, but problems worth solving, and I think that pertains to not just invention and entrepreneurship, but also our education system, that we're engaging our students in and out of classrooms in problems worth solving. It's not just any old problem. So I'll end my comment there. Unless there's questions.
I do have a question, and I kind of harking back to what Steve Brown said at the summit. He said 68% of the jobs in the future aren't there today. So it's clearly his message is you're going to need to have lifelong learning. And I know we're doing innovation grants to stimulate kids to be interested in STEM and CTE and all those things, but do we ever look at the quality of those programs to teach the skills of lifelong learning as opposed to just giving them exposure? And maybe that is one and the same, but it seems like as we're trying to do these innovation grants, maybe putting a lens on this is, are we teaching kids to learn, not teaching kids to do things? I mean, that's a little different maybe in my mind, but I just wonder as this world is changing, to your point around coders, teach kids to learn and they can code, that's great, as opposed to they can just code. So I don't know if that's, if we think about our innovation grants and work that's being done, can we put a lens on that work, learn something?
No, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that viewpoint is shared by every single STEM hub in the state. I think it's definitely shared by our STEM Beyond Schools, our Math in Real Life, our computer science investments, and we had held a convening in October, Jerry, around STEM outcomes and talking about program quality. So that conversation we're hoping to continue. The Institute for Youth Success, the Oregon Community Foundation, many others participated alongside our STEM grantees to have that conversation, and every single one of them landed on the impact of socio-emotional skills. How do I see myself, my own STEM identity, being a lifelong learner, being able to access those opportunities and take advantage of them. So absolutely, that is front and center, and I think as we move forward, we need to ensure that we're elevating that as part of the STEM conversation, because many people see, there's certain segments of our system and our education system that sees STEM as being really focused on content and attainment of degrees, and not necessarily on these other skill sets that will make ensure that people are able to navigate that changing world. So that's an ongoing challenge for us to communicate what we mean by the work of this council.
I think you're right on target. I still see schools that are banning the internet inside the schools as a resource for learning. I mean, all of my young employees are phenomenal learners within my company, not because of necessarily the information that we impart as a company to them, but we give them challenges and they instantly go out and know how to find the resources online and other places to build jobs. And yet they don't see that portion of their education until they get to college. And it's only in college and in homework at home are they allowed the freedom to actually learn, right, and learn how to learn. Schools absolutely forbid it in a couple different places, which just it's old school mentality of the teacher having to be the number one resource, or the book having to be the number one resource, not the greatest thing invented in the last 6 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, because that sparked something else that I meant to report out on, and that is that our hubs are really also elevating student voice as a critical piece of their work. Southern Oregon STEM Hub, Eastern Oregon STEM Hub, East Metro, and others have been in conversations. They have youth voice or youth ambassador initiatives, and they are planning on actually bringing some of those youth to the February legislative session, to the short session. I would love for them to also to try to align that with a STEM council meeting, if at all possible, so that they are able to meet with this body. But we expect too little of our students, I think, oftentimes, and they are such incredible resources for not just ideas and energy, but really they will shape and make the future, and we need to believe in them and listen to them. And so as we elevate their voice in this, helping other educators and other elements of the system realize the power of harnessing youth voice and perspective, I think will be a critical piece of going forward. Because we can't stop them accessing resources that they are completely native in using.
They will tell you they're bored with some old ways of teaching.
Absolutely.
They will tell you that front and center. They're not bashful.
If we were bored with some of those opportunities, I can guarantee you that they are. And that's not to say that there aren't phenomenal things happening in our classrooms. And I want to make sure that we don't denigrate the great work like is happening in our Oregon Science Teachers Association and the Oregon Science Project, for example. Those teachers are really changing the way that they approach and believe students as they address those phenomena and articulate their thinking in a very complex fashion. So, again, I want to not take too much time here, but as we look to our agenda for the future, I think highlighting some of those programs. So, Jamie, you can count on being invited back to say more about the Oregon Science Project.
Well, I'd like to add one thing with that, Mark, and that is the question: how do we get more innovative on thinking in the and market? Okay, because the very thing we're talking about is also true. Okay, there's a really amazing great, and it's almost like a fight. Okay, oh, by the way, don't ever fail, because if you fail, you're going to take everything later. As opposed to this forward-looking situation where we're putting dollars into it when they actually have some progress, be able to plan on that, letting the administrator know part of the system be effective. Like, put the kids back in the school, turn the internet off, and do what you've done for the last 50 years. Basketball. No, I don't know how we best do that, but just do it. Okay, so I'd like to use more of that in our work.
Absolutely, and this council called out in September a desire to see more alignment and focus on principals and superintendents and educational leaders in these grant programs, and all of the grant programs have responded in that regard. We also put out an RFP through the Department of Education for regional STEM innovation grants, and one of the priority areas was in terms of attention to leadership. And I think that's an area that's going to require a lot more sustained focus, because yes, how do we shift cultures and the leader's view of both the power of educators and the power of students?
Added to that, we had Jamie in our breakout session from Dayton High School, and she's fabulous. I mean, she raises all the things you raise, which she took personal risk. You know, she was failing quickly in some areas and succeeding in others, but she was driving it, and she was scared. I mean, she was kind of making it up as she goes, you know, and she had a lot of help from Thompson and others to help her, and that was what morning. There were people there to work. It was a fabulous story. Maybe one last question. You talked about successes and impact. What do we got planned for next year in terms of conferences, things that could bring people together to have? Do we have that yet? Calendar? You're supposed to formulate that.
We haven't had it calendared yet. I've engaged in some conversations with some of our STEM Hub members around having a kind of a statewide STEM host and making that a little bit more broader. Looking at fall of next year, it's going to take some planning, but yeah, there's that. And then the Youth Voice folks are talking about 2019 having a large state convene around Youth Voice. So those two things are coming up, and I'll check with Director Cannon more on that workforce education piece that he talked about in January. I'd like to see if there's an opportunity for our hubs and our banks.
So the meeting we had last spring at Newport.
Yeah.
Anything like that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, would you like to talk about that, Deb? I mean, I think we can transition and have you address that as well.
That's what I think Jim and I are also talking about.
Okay, yeah.
Trying to get everybody in the same room and what might be on that.
Yeah, thank you.
Good lead in.
Yeah, good lead in for me, thanks. Yeah, we do still have on the calendar to have a STEM hub-wide convening in April, and that's what attended last April. And then the one in August. In my 2 years here, that's generally where we have fallen, April and August during a biennium. And the one in August is the one that we attend to bring in coordinators. And this last one in August was large, where we had CWP and HEC and a lot of people there. So I'm not sure yet on how widespread the August one will be, but I know for sure we'll have CTE and some help together.
You've got a clicker there. You can advance your own slides.
Okay.
Turn it on first. Please. It's on the side.
Oh. Have to note that. Oh. Is it on?
Check. Okay, well, I can advance. Does it?
Okay,
we
I
go.
think I turned it on. Thanks. Okay, so yeah, thanks for having me. Deb Bailey, the STEM education specialist at OBE. I know many of you here. I want to give you an update on all of the hub great work that's been going on. Since this fall started, I have tried to get out and do a few STEM site visits, STEM Hub site visits. I've visited East Metro, Columbia Gorge, and Umpqua so far, and it's still not advancing. But anyway, in your packet, you have a handout that I gave you here on 4 highlights from 4 different hubs. You can take a look at that and read it. But just to highlight some of the things, Go STEM. A few months ago, I put a call out to the hubs and I said, I'm trying to get a better sense of what they're doing with early learning and the early learning hubs. And Go STEM wrote me back and said, hey, we've got this great teacher professional development that we're doing that we coordinated with the Head Starts in Kearney County. And so they teamed up with them and the hub, and they found a provider, a professional development provider. So they are now made STEM as the theme for this year for all of the professional development that they do with the early learning providers. I thought that was a great project that they were working on. This next year, they actually are working with natural resources this year, and this next year they're going to be working with healthcare, making it a very specific area that they're working. And I think that that is very indicative of the regional needs there too. So they're paying attention to what they need. Umpqua has done some great stuff. They last 2 summers, in 16 and 17, they did summer camps known as Expanded Horizons, called that. And they just got some more funding, and they've been working with us to offer that again this coming 2018. So they're going to be adding 2 new camps to their already profile there of healthcare, manufacturing technology, and various trade camps. So they're continuing to expand that, and that is for middle school students with high school students acting as mentors. So they've been very successful in those camps. So natural resources and business entrepreneurship will be added for this coming summer. Lane, they just got a grant. I asked them kind of what's your highlights, what you've got going on right now, and they just got a grant from Mozilla to work on a program called Coder in Residence. And so I thought it was nice that they pointed out all of the computer scientists that they're having come in to work in the schools are female. So that was great that they were able to access that. And they wanted to point out they're doing professional development this Saturday, if any of you are interested. Come check that out. And here in Portland, some of you probably are familiar with how they have worked on the patterns approach for the high school science sequence. And so they basically have kind of reversed the way that they teach science in high school. So they're starting out with physics, they move on to chemistry, and then they finish their course sequence with biology. So it's really kind of backwards thinking what we've always done, like not do what we've always done. And so I'd be interested to learn more about that project and the outcomes that they associate with that. So those are some great things that the hubs are doing. And one thing I wanted to point out too with these hub updates is that 2 of them really that I pulled out and I realized are really about them leveraging other sources of funding because they are STEM hubs. And I think that's an important point to make, and that they are able to receive grants outside with outside institutions, your family foundation or others. I think because they are a STEM hub, and they even have called that out, and they said they have that kind of cloud now. Hub. So bringing us to the next page, and I guess my slides aren't going to work today for us, but I don't know what's done.
Right.
So most of you, I think, all have the handout anyway, so that's pretty much what was on the slides. But I wasn't planning to do slides at all, so look what happened. See, I threw slides together at the last
Well, there
minute.
you go.
Yeah.
Got that.
So
Oh,
new
now it
hubs.
does. I think it's a screen. Oh, I think there we go.
Okay. Oh, is it working now?
It's,
Oh, okay. I'll catch myself up here. So, you sure?
oh, it's advancing on my computer, but it's not advancing up there. Oh my God! All right. All right. There's a ghost in the machine.
Today, my phone rang. And really on top of technology today. All right. So new hubs. I can just talk about new
Now
hubs.
try it.
Oh, there we go. Okay, so there's the project I talked about. That's a little small, but anyway, new hubs. We've got 2 new hubs in the state. We ran a competitive grant release, and it was released in November 6th, or they were submitted November 6th, excuse me. I'm looking back at my own notes here. September 22nd is when we released. So that's the length of time that they had to write the proposal, and basically that was a proposal to write their partnership plan. So we were trying to be very clear with them that they were going to submit to us what they planned to do to write their partnership plan. And so then we took those plans on what they wanted to do and had an external review team look at those applications and make some decisions. They used a scoring rubric, and we looked at the scores and made some funding recommendations to Lindsay and Colt. And this is what they recommended for funding. So we have 2 new hubs, Lynn Benton Community College, and they have titled themselves the Mid-Valley Mid-Coast STEM CTE Hub. And that was their ask and award. And then we also have the Northwest Regional ESD that applied to become a hub and have called themselves the Northwest STEM Hub. And so those are their ask and award. So I just spoke with both of those leaders this week on Tuesday and Thursday, and going to be working with them along with some help from Oregon Solutions to help them work on writing that partnership plan. They have up to a year to do it. Once we receive that partnership plan and think it's of high quality, we will release $75,000 of additional backbone funding, and then they will also be available to apply for up to $100,000 for programming.
Is this proposal for a mid-coast divide the existing coastal hub into segment now?
No, not necessarily. One of the requirements that they had in their proposal was to discuss how they plan to work with their bordering hubs and the other hubs in the state. And to be honest, in the phone calls this week, both of them said, well, we don't really know what we're going to do and what we're going to learn from all the other hubs because we haven't really been in the playground, if you will. Now that we're in the playground, we're very much willing and able and wanting to work with the other hubs. I don't think that there will be a direct split in that regard in the coastal hubs and the coast, but they are going to be working in conjunction with them for sure.
Yeah, I understand the requirement and the need and the synergy of working with them, but to put it in your name completely sets a different tone.
Well,
That name was part of their regional achievement collaborative for the region. So
I know, and that's why I'm
called it
thinking it's going to
Development
drive
Coast.
the wedge right through the middle of the coastal.
Yeah, the Coast STEM Hub has commitments from those districts already that are along the coast. So,
But there's also some benefit to it too, because when last April when we were speaking to folks, I mean that is a extraordinarily long, 300-mile long hub that only had, yes, it has the ocean in common, but North Coast is completely different than the South Coast. And the Mid Coast, I mean, the economies are different. So the idea, I guess the question I have is fundamentally you're starting to spin up a Northwest hub, right? And you've got this Mid hub now that's going to the coast. Is there a benefit of looking at a realignment where you tie the communities into the region? That's really common on a lot of other economic development boards of other tier states.
we're going to work closely with partners in all of those hubs to ensure that they are the ones who are determining what's best for their region.
Gotta think about the seams. How do you manage the seams?
Yeah.
And what are the seams? So we don't have overlaps.
Yeah, and I think Mark made a point that right now that name that they've chosen came from their past work with their regional chief collaborative. But we are in conversation with them about member districts and various issues that go along with border review. So we're trying to help them think about their as they develop.
You mentioned that, like you said, there were 3 applications. You funded 2. That means 1 didn't get funded.
Yeah.
Where was that?
Can I tell them? Yeah, okay. It was I'm like, yeah, total knowledge. Okay. It was what I call the new UMPA. They called themselves the Natural Leadership, I don't know their title, but they're actually within Douglas County. And they, did not get funded. They were very close to the currently funded hub, and there was some,
At this juncture, I mean, we got a map here. I believe we're now essentially covered.
Well, I think that there's our map, as we've previously talked about, conveys some potential misunderstandings, right, in terms of covering the state. I think there's opportunities for every district in the state to participate in a hub in their region. We don't have full participation of every district within a region.
That's not,
yes, there's an opportunity for people.
But my
to
concern
participate.
is here at some juncture, we
Yes.
have to say enough is enough.
Yes.
Work within your framework as opposed to adding additional layers
Yes.
of administration
Yes.
and cost.
and we have in my communication out to the field, I have stated that as far as I know, like we said, there's no guarantees right in this work per se, but as far as I know, this is the last round of emerging hubs,
All right. That's what
and we landed on 13.
I mean, I can see a hub asking for
Lucky
additional
13.
Yeah.
monies to expand and broaden their reach within their territories. I don't think we should close that door by any stretch.
Well, as you raised earlier, I think when we've got 13 hubs now, and we've got our funding for the STEM hubs has declined slightly over the last few bienniums. So the slice of the pie to each hub has decreased. So the more that we can do to continue to elevate this strategy and to seek and support for additional funding to the hubs, I think would be something that we would want to be on our priority list.
Is OSU involved at all?
Yes. And they're continually building that relationship. And
A quick question: How many of the clubs have a relationship with a 4-year college or a?
okay, help me, Mark. Right? Well,
I think all of them
I think
have
all of
a
them-
relationship with a post-secondary institution.
yeah, that I think would be safe to say.
The level of participation varies.
The level of participation and the level of post-secondary, I think. Like, STEM is involved with the Coast, and now Lynn Benton is involved with OSU.
As well as the community.
As well as the
I think that. What?
Okay, yeah, we'll make Mark make that.
What a map.
Yeah, like a map of the hubs and their relationship.
And how they.
Oh gosh.
Yeah,
Great.
we can. Clear that
Hey, you want to
Yeah,
tape
sure.
one?
up. Oh, man, I couldn't do that. He just took my slides away. What
Oh.
happened, Mark?
Oh, I thought you were done.
Yeah,
No, sorry. No.
Next steps.
Dang, sorry.
But
Go
anyway,
ahead.
no, it was next steps. But then the last thing I just wanted to let you guys know, that all of you know about, is the letter of intent that went out.
Sorry.
So no worries. This is just a summary.
Cut her off.
Cut me off. I'm talking too much. A call for a letter of intent was released on November 1st. They had about 3 weeks to submit their application to let us know what they wanted to do. We ended up asking them basically in the letter of intent, just what are you interested in doing? What do you think it would cost to do that? And many of them have prioritized the efforts that they want to work on. So you can see the number of hubs requesting kind of in each category that we would like them to focus their energy and effort on. The most pressing one that came out in those LOIs is the increasing youth voice. So I think, as Mark alluded to earlier, We're in the process now of trying to work with them on either prioritizing and saying, look, you have to cut your budget because we don't have that much money. We can see the discrepancy and the difference there. Or trying to coordinate them a little bit more and bring together things. And, Youth Voice is a good example. 7 out of 11 hubs wanted to do something in Youth Voice with this LOI, going back at their original programming grant that they submitted last end of summer, beginning of fall. There were other hubs that had put in money for programming for Youth Voice. So I think that's a good opportunity to try to work at the statewide network collaboration. That's my steps. We're going to be trying to get the money out by mid-February.
How did the money go this fall? Did money get out to the hubs?
Yes, almost all of the hubs. We've got a couple of hang-ups simply with our new process. We had a couple of hiccups that happened with 3 hubs at the beginning, and we're trying to fix those. We've gotten 2 out of the 3 fixed, and we're almost there. They all have some money. They all have, we're giving them $30,000.
No disruption of.
No, not that I've heard. Is there?
Tell you.
Tell me later. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Good update on the hubs, and do you look forward to do we have a date for the April meeting? Is that? Yeah. The date for the April.
It's, I think we're going to go with the first week of April. No, a date has not been set yet.
Okay, so so when you get a date, please send it out to the council. So
I will as soon
And
as
then
possible.
agenda items for that meeting is also important.
Yes.
We're interested in discussing employer involvement. Employers involvement. Yeah. Did you catch that?
I'm sorry.
No.
Not the agenda.
The agenda. If you can get that to Mark and Jim as soon as possible, when it starts to form, because we're interested in perhaps carving off some time to have and emphasize employer involvement, try to incentivize getting a number of employers from each hub comes with and to that meeting.
Maybe even have a panel with employers or something like that to see what they're trying to get out of the hubs and what we see.
And also do some instruction in regards to, from the employer side, some advice to the hubs on how to get us. How do you get us involved? How do you suck us? How do you get us to write checks? How do you get our involvement?
That's great advice.
So we want to try to get that on the agenda. So I know you guys, it was action packed last time. So how to fit that in?
We had a suggestion by one of our STEM Employer Coalition members that CT STEM Employer Coalition is around teaching the executive director of the hubs how to make the ask, how to fish, because it is a special skill in terms of making the ask and raising capital.
Some are really good at it. Some probably could use some advice.
All right, thank you. Yeah.
Good morning. I'm on. Good. Still morning. Good morning. I was with my grandkids at Blue Lights last night. Feel quite a little bit out of sorts. Anyway, my name is Tom Thompson, Department of Education. I'm doing, as Mark alluded, kind of shifting my position a little bit, actually quite a bit, into more of the STEM area, but I'm still on the same team on STEM and STEM advising at the department. Right now, I'm kind of doing both, so doing the STEM side and forward. And what I was asked to do is do a little bit of an update on CT revitalizations. Questions about that, feel free to answer. I'll answer anything. So, we have the current status of the CT revitalization grant. We had 64 grants submitted. We're always oversubscribed on this. Never quite the amount of money, but it seems like the amount of money always is twice what we can use. So we're consistent, even if we can't do everything. So it's 20.9 million requests. We then reviewed grants. There were 60 reviewers that came together one day to go through. They've actually had the grants ahead of time. Each review team looked at 3 to 4 grants. and agreed to fund 32 projects at about $4 billion projects. So that kind of gives you the numbers. This is a map of the current projects. I have get access to this online. I really can't link up to the interactive map. That is a live PowerPoint, so that's kind of PowerPoint. You can go into a link where you can actually hover over any of those dots, figure out who it is that we're talking about. So you can see it covers the state. Of course, the density of population of schools is at least especially north, so we have a lot there. But we have 4 up and down the coast. That one that's kind of south, the middle state, the way south is Lakeview. So area that we've never had a word before, so that's kind of nice. And then northeast we have Ottawa County, which is kind of interesting. And then you see some of them, and they're spread out quite a bit. And if we look at this over a period of 4 years, done a pretty good job of trying to distribute this around the state. Not just distribute money just for the sake of it, but these are all have been rated as high quality projects. That has been a major emphasis. Whatever is being done, high quality project.
Are any of these guys signaling that they're planning on using Measure $90 to sustain?
Yes, I have some. I think I collected that. Let me see if I've actually included that as I go.
I did have one question on the group. I'm surprised that PPS did they even put an application?
No, they
in
did
one of
not.
our
But
largest school districts?
No, they had an application 1 year, and again, that was funded. And they used that to grow their programs dramatically. So they started a huge program. They, as a district, have invested a large amount of money to that, and that may be part of their choice. I don't know, but they have not actually requested that one by. But they've grown about 40 programs dramatically
In the last few years, being out of conventions, tireless.
There was a couple changes in the program this year in 2017-19. We did reduce the cap funding for districts a little bit. We were kind of over numbered by any. We realized there's sort of a number that people gravitate towards. So in order to spread it out a little bit more, we kind of said, well, let's reduce the cap a little bit. And say, okay, that's what we're shooting for, rather than shooting something above and then not be able to fund entirely. There's also a focus on the promoting middle school. So we have it in really where we really emphasize that if you want to fund a program that is in middle school, that is pretty much entirely in middle school, then please do that. But it needs to connect to the high school, and consequently the high school to post-secondary. That's part of the requirements for an approved program study. And actually, as a federal funds, every one of our approved programs have a tie to a college. Many of them tied to other post-secondary. So we do have some projects that were focused heavily on middle school. One of them, I think that was the Minville that was there. They had a couple of rounds of funding. That's both. Theirs is about trying to get the middle school students up and interested so that they move to high school and connect to the programs in high school and move into post-secondary jobs. Just wanted to take a quick pause and you probably, and those who are flipping through, notice that there's information here. 2 things that I provided in the packet. One is a abstract that was provided to us from each project that was funded, so you can kind of see where they are and what they're generally doing. And then there's a summary after the abstracts that lists all the recipients and the awards that they were providing for that. And that brings up the last bullet point on the slide, is that the summer program funding that we had in the previous biennium was discontinued. The funding was not provided for this one. So instead, what we did was to try to incorporate that revitalization, an option that could apply for a supplement to be able to run summer program. So, and you could apply simply for summer program. That was a request from the folks who were supporting revitalization. So we did, and you can see in the handout that you have a column with regular award. That's just CT revitalization. And then if there was a summer program supplement, do that in the summer. So that the two combined. And you'll see on some of these where the summer program was all so that things don't apply full revitals.
Just a question on the last set of grants. Do you go back and audit those programs? Are they still all being in service to students, or do you know that?
We did an actual formal approach to that in the very first round of grant. Found that there were only 8 projects at that time. I believe it was 7 out of 8 that survived and that continued. We are talking about actually repeating that process. But anecdotally, it's going to be a very high percentage, at least 90% of those, higher than that are actually provided. So, basically.
The legislature, there's money is well spent, and in fact, it's creating long-term sustainability of programs.
And I'd like to also point out that I think, and this is just, we haven't had a chance, all of us haven't had a chance to follow them at the level of detail that I can tell you everything about every one of these grants, 32 proposals. Eventually, we will get to that point and visit them and find out what they're doing. One of the things that has been maybe have, it feels like we have more new programs. So they can support existing programs and ramp those up and improve the quality of those programs when implemented. That says something to me about the stability it may be building, the idea that we can actually start when it's going. And that brings up the Nation mandate high school success fund. So and right now we have the current 32 proposals addressed have list over 100, I think it's 101 schools, that middle schools, high school. Those schools serve over 66,000 students. That doesn't mean every one of those 66,000 is going to connect, but every one of those 66,000 has a project somewhere that is tied that they might be access to, all the everything aligned. And then over 300 partners, community college, business industry, workforce, private nonprofits, especially. We have a number of grants that we brought on board, organizations that address the needs of their students. Tribes are part of the partnership. So there's a lot of different projects. What's that? The list of partners. Right now, they're in each of the individual proposals, but we haven't actually filed it. We just released officially the results of this last week. That is the intent.
That'd also be interesting, given those programs, how many kids actually will get access to the program? What percentage of the 66,000 could attend, given the class size and demographics?
And we do ask that in the final report progress.
Yeah, so we should add that metric.
I think leveraging is interesting. There, you brought up a question about the Nation 98, which is high school success. There are 18 proposals that directly said we are using the funds to leverage to work with this project or to improve CT around this project. There may be others that are using the funds in other ways, but these are ones that specifically mentioned that.
Just seems like the logical 1-2 punch, right? Here's your grant to get started, and here's your sustaining dollars.
And there are a few of them said that's this first round of funding they would use. They're getting pretty much 100%, especially some of the smaller schools. That's covered. So that is there. Ask people to tell us about it. They did. They're also identified cases where there's 6 different STEM hubs that were identified as partners. Proposals. That doesn't mean that there are only 6. Sometimes they're not listed in a partnership conversation, but for whatever reason, they don't get into the list of partners. And I know, for example, one hub that the connection between CT and STEM is so close, they had to have been part of that, but they're just not listed as being part of it. So there are probably more. There are at least 6 hubs that are identified.
I know when we do our reviews and work hard, so to speak, on the hubs, make sure that that's actually so something should be reported, and that activity,
There's that coordination with the
operation.
And the interesting thing,
We got one question. We typically don't do this, but
And you can, you
Yeah,
can
go
say no.
ahead.
One of my executive advisory board members is a representative. I just spoke to a served on. One of his comments to that point was making sure that our investment in STEM hubs are coordinated with the revitalization grant, and that there's recognition by CTE revitalization grant proposers of the existing resources of their program projects of incorporating using those resources that already invested in
I think there's some places for doing exactly that. I thought that was one of the coming things. A couple of connections that, again, you just take a look on the program. There may be a lot more STEM focus on these things, but at least 17 of the proposals identify STEM specifically as a major focus. So these would be programs that are heavily engineering focused, maybe in the computer science area. There's a whole range of things. So I've kind of talked about 4 of them that actually identify CS or robotics as being a focus for them. 8 that identify engineering. 2 of them area of health occupation, and a number of them beyond the 17 talk about STEM, not necessarily as the primary focus of their whole program, but it is part of that. For example, incorporating changing the way math is taught or there. Didn't list that in the 17 because that's kind of a piece of that broader proposal. 17, they have stated they have fairly strong connection. Couple of things that I thought I'd highlight. I can't talk about all of these, but I was pulling out a few that might be of interest. The first 2 are really the major ones in terms of the health occupation, and they're very different. Douglas ESD is carrying on a model that was funded in Wayne County and Coos County, and now they're going to use it as a regional model for health professions, and it will actually get health occupation programs in a lot of very small districts. Don't remember the exact number of districts, but 13. Okay, thank you.
Thanks,
yes.
Glenn.
Oh, good. Good. And by the way, it's one of the hubs, and it was definitely identified as connecting. So that's why Gwen knows that. So some really nice work there. And then Hillsborough is biomedical science focused. And that's something fairly new for us. It's actually now considered to be a new career area that we didn't have in the past. And our specialist department, Mark Witkowski, has been working hard to try to get that growing in biomedical science post health practitioner. So there's one program for high school out on board. SCAPUS is interesting. Many of you may have heard of OMIC. And whatever I don't know the history and stories behind it, but they're actually connecting. They looked at that as a way to kind of begin work in terms of the manufacturing innovation, advanced manufacturing. So that's part of it, part of their work. Center for Advanced Learning is starting a cybersecurity program. That is the first time I've heard of one of those programs. I've seen cybersecurity show up in CS-related programs, but this is one focused on cybersecurity. So,
are they connected with the work at Mount Community College in cybersecurity?
I haven't. I wouldn't be able to tell you right off, but I could look at that. If they aren't, we will make sure that they should be. So, Southern Oregon and Willow ESDs. These are 2 brand new aeronautical engineering, everywhere from flight training, pilots training to the more of the science and math behind the engineering component to it. Willow is actually going to the airport, Bacon Airport, docent, and having multiple. So interesting, yeah, some new programs growing. And then Helen's View and Lincoln County Tech, I think, are really interesting ones in the sense that they are, one is that they're focused on this work-based learning, structuring their entire program about kind of entrepreneurial workplace sort of setting. So at Helen's View, they actually are building, they over the last couple of years, these are both alternative programs, and I hate to use that term, but these are programs that are addressing the needs that are not being addressed in standard school. So they've been in these programs. Helen's View has spent the last couple of years on a shoestring trying to move into an entrepreneurial focus to try to get these students to understand how they can actually begin to become self-sufficient and start their own business. Working with that. So that's a focus, and they're now have some funds to build that out. Lincoln County Tech actually has a structure where they have groups, teams that work on projects, and each team has a specialty. So it's not necessarily a program. The whole school is around projects, project-based work, the teams, the various teams, specialty. So it's really growing in capacity. So next steps, we have a project meeting called Recipient on February 23rd. We're beginning to build the agenda for that. That would be a good place to really highlight the work hubs. We're actually working with the workforce system to have some people there. So we're open to all kinds of ways to really help these people that have submitted these proposals understand what's out there, how they can leverage more, build capacity. We are going to be doing site visits fall of 2018 and spring of 2019. Invite any participation from others that are interested. We try to have MOD staff, have a coordinator, and then anybody else that might have council from hubs, whoever else might have it. Try not to have a cast of thousands show up at the school, but at least it's a way to really get a sense of what the projects are doing. 2018 is really about, that's the point where that's something to happen for students. Really building infrastructure, buying equipment, that takes time, so by default, should have something happening at that time. We focus on talking to partners, talking to the school, what's the progress, what we're doing, that kind of thing. Spring 2019 are focused on what students are telling us about. And then the final reporting is in the fall. The final reporting will be progress. So we have a couple other things kind of we've been playing with as far as connecting people better in the projects that they like to do. There is this sort of family feeling in sort of sense. I've gotten a C2 revitalization grant. I'm finally part of that family, and we'd like to build on that. So there's something special about work they put in. Pride they take part. So I will leave that. If you have any questions?
I do have a comment. That was and I applaud your efforts with making person. It had a very lively discussion about a lot of same grant. So it was really educational.
And it's great that they are very about those projects. Very good about it.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Great success, and keep us involved as we go through this. And there's
Mr. Starr, break. A quick break?
a 5-minute break, stretch break.
Stretch break?
Yeah, part of our healthy lives. 5 minutes, get things teed up.
5 minutes.
5 minutes,
Right
huh?
back.
Yeah, 10:46.
Yeah, we're.
It's pretty straightforward to get there. I got
Those online, just an FYI, we're taking about a 5-minute break.
Oh, good. The address and what the language we use here on Saturday.
Oh, it's the same.
Good, how are you?
Same thing. This one, and then the password is that plus the dollar sign.
Kind of rule that out as a possibility. Or at least they might hear me. That's important. Listen to what I'm saying. That's all I'm telling you. What do you think so far? That's a general question. General question.
Informative.
Informative. A lot of work to do.
Front door is
That's
really
true.
not right there. One of the things that I did right there was finding out cut out right there. Next to my option, we found that way.
That I've observed over my 30 years of this work is that educators are always creating
Are you doing more in if you have them
and for community-based programs to look for
well, I know. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I have somebody to show up. Right.
It's the whole thing. So there's people coming and they get together and they work things out and they go try things out and they bring it back and say, okay, this worked, this didn't, you know. So I think that there's opportunity like that. That's it, right? It's all about this.
in an urban, very
Okay, our 5 minutes is up, so we gotta go. Keep this thing at least moving. All right.
So, dig it deep.
We did pretty good. We did it in 6.
6 minutes, all right.
That's good. All right. So John, you are on.
Like I should say something. Okay, I'll talk.
Outside voice, teacher voice. For
John
those on the phone.
Starr. The title is Project Director for the Statewide Longitudinal Data System. Give a real brief update. The agenda, I'll let you read that, but this is not a hard and fast agenda. What I'm really looking for is to start this dialogue. A little bit of history about the system. The longitudinal data systems have tried to gain traction since about 2005 to various different degrees of success. And we were approved short session 2016 to develop longitudinal system. The system itself is what we call a modified off-the-shelf data system. So that means it's not homegrown. These are time-proven data that put together to handle the data system. The first engine is Informatica. That is a master engine in Gartner triangle, upper right. It is best applied, has been. Second, business intelligence piece, and that is applied through IBM Cognos. So these are engines that have been used, proven, well over 20 years. The advantage to us is that it's not homegrown. We being the state for development of a data system. So it reduces the risk to the state. It does have modification in it, Oregon need. So high skill operability, interoperability system. IBM Cognos is the visualization side, so it's the report generator. And that will be primary interface between system and research. So that's kind of a real high overview. The presentation really is educational focus, but that is not the direction we want to head. Example, I presented basically the same presentation for Oregon for partnership. We're looking at this more as a holistic system that looks at the specific cohorts throughout time, basically preschool on through course. And so it wasn't part of our first charter, but that's the first. I'm not going to read this. Basically, what this does, it allows us for real-time access to data over multiple settings, over the key point. Currently, the system contains early learning, K-12, higher ed, O2, and work. That is not the total collection. So we have to grow. We have a lot of interest being expressed by a lot of in our negotiations with them. The purpose. To target a different cohorts. There are patients for that. Say across multiple years, based on the data that. So I can't go back. And I'll talk a little bit where the base is with the data. It's to enhance research and analysis to evaluate and develop programs, practices. Quickly identify quick identity access to outcomes programs to enables through data policy decisions to address education.
How's the data entered? I mean, is it just clean from existing reporting districts, or is it going to require additional?
Thank you. Actually, we receive our data from the higher education work with the informatica tool that I spoke of before is not limited to form. I can consume Oracle, I can consume Excel, I can consume handwritten because it's scanned. I'm not limited by that. I can consume the data with that. So as we reach across, it's a great example. Early learning is starting their data system. We have very small pop shops, formal, and we're seeing everything from handwritten literature up to accent.
One of the things that, because the system is so powerful in consuming different kinds of data, one thing that I know with our community education partners, we're going to ask and schools is how do we connect more specifically around the in-school and out-of-school so that we capture these other sort of free choice learning opportunities and the influence that those might have on graduation rates as well. So we're not going to be there in 2018, I don't think, but we should be laying the foundation for that so that we can start to map and connect the in-school and out-of-school opportunities as well through this.
So our initial deliverables, I spoke to this earlier, links across early age of higher and high level student demographic, degree status, course history, basically everything that Department of Ed, higher ed, work for, and size.
You track things like new program format that could help.
Some of that, but it's correct. So it's literally scattered. But on the positive side, at least I identify what you don't.
how small of a cohort you get down to running? So you can't follow a person. Or can you follow a classroom, figure out if their teacher derails a group of 30 kids, or if a particular school derails a certain group of kids, or causes kids to excel, but positive.
With the right agreements and the right, yes.
I mean, we're just dealing with social security numbers, I assume, as opposed to paying things, or is it to lowly social security identification?
Well, there's best described. Within the system, two main components. There's the development test side of it. Within the development test side of specific features that access to person. So they will be able to do that too. That is really tied to no type of basis. The production universe is de-identified, aggregated, and supplied. So you would not be able to do much.
No, I didn't say I wanted to do it. I was curious if it could.
Exactly. But the suppression rules vary across those different sectors as well. So OGP has a suppression level, Tech has a different, as does Workforce. So if you do a longitudinal crosstalk, we have to apply those different levels of suppression on one of the data. So information that we present being aggregated will be different from what you can see those specific ask for that.
So is the data not aggregated for data can't be disaggregated for in other words, thinking from a security perspective, I can collect all the data that I want. I just report it all. I, as an administrator, or I, as a certain body of people, have access to all of it. But you will never see it because you're not in the problem. Right? So being able to say that, let's say that, let's say I'm in your system, that every class I've ever taken, where I've gone to school, could identify me in that next small deal. But it will never be reported like that because
yes.
They've taken extraordinary lengths to protect individual privacy. Turn from our legislature and from the very beginning, define privacy and that the ownership of the data resides with student and family.
Right. So
Let me ask one quick.
Yes.
You'll know what they did or what happened to that individual. You won't know necessarily why they did it. So if a student goes into college in engineering and they drop out their freshman year, you'll show that as a dropout, but you won't necessarily have the qualitative reason why they dropped out. So it's going to be a lot of assumptions of why that happened, but you're not going to let you go find that person.
well, let's
Could you
hold
see
that
where
question
that
for just a second. And
I'll give it one more thing out there because the question I asked, if I, as an administrator or a technology person, what period I can get in, as opposed to just can't do that. Fine, ever doesn't.
that is, since we're talking about security, this is really interesting presentation, very last bullet. The data system provided the state data. There are its primary firewall that would have to be two elements. And the key platforms that would provide continuous encryption with data at rest or data within the master data management. There's continuous masking of the encrypted data. So we're 3 levels of encryption on the first level. And subscription fees changing. Current data, and we'll talk a little more detail. K-12 student data, we have 6-7 to present. Likewise, with post-secondary ed, community college, workforce data, we have represent 3.5 terabytes. We have a lot of one of the hurdles that we had to overcome, since it spans time, have identity resolution comes to play. So when a student starts their career, mom and dad have a little more control of the provider. James Johnson. As they progress in their scholastic life, they gain a little more control at the point. So James Johnson, at the time of grade, John, by the time in high school, this is a real example. It's all. So we take all of that data to the master data management system, aggregate, compare, and longitudinally align that data with the system. So that's how we get that vision of what that student is doing.
Can you track that student once they leave in terms of education?
Not
Across the state conversations happening.
it is.
That's a big. They explode out to many different areas. Now you got a problem tracking.
There's a number of those situations. Kiddos that graduate from high school, they're gone. Had that conversation, which likes getting that look because there's a lot of certification that goes into and then it's just another piece of the puzzle that we're trying to.
And for the workforce system data, is economic or is the employment department? Employment data, are they employed, how much they're making?
Yes.
And without specifics, or is that specific?
They have down to the person.
So the universities, if they're doing outcomes-based funding for an engineering program, be able to track whether or not talent is where the kid made their decisions through the K-12 that led them into an engineering degree, were successful getting the degree. That shouldn't happen.
No. No. The data that's contained system will allow you to see the student. Example, electrical engineer graduate, University of Oregon. What we will be able to look at is, at a point in time, what sector is that work?
How much money they're making?
Yes.
Which gives you a pretty good picture of whether or not the education is paying off.
It kind of does. So, electrical engineer, University of Oregon, working at Intel, maybe, actually. But you're not for sure.
Just make sure you say Oregon State.
Oregon.
This is probably a level of granularity, but in our data subcommittee, we were using the Brookings Institute kind of job classifications. Are they going to use it?
That's awesome.
We've already gone through and they've prioritized some of the STEM dashboards conversations, so we make sure that those flags have been.
So the process of an organization like STEM Council wanting a lot of different what ifs.
Yep.
Is that a situation where you train us on how to use the software, or we put questions to you or sit down with you in real time and go through and all the questions. We can start to get the data because this is what's supposed to be real time, right? You're supposed to be able to pull this stuff up quickly so it can be a real brainstorming like activity. You chase this path, can you go down this path? That just going to be done on a contractual basis for hours, or is it just free and available to us? Or how do you guys going to? I assume you're going to have a lot of customers very rapidly.
Completely open and honest.
Oh, no.
We don't know yet.
We've got to work it in.
Hmm.
We would love to have the research capacity with the chief ed office to be responsive to those kind of needs. I know that certainly the STEM hubs themselves, many have asked for that capability to access, and there's going to be, John mentioned, levels of access. And I'm hoping that when we get to sort of near the end of conversation, we can ask the council for some of those examples of what do you want to know, what sort of comparisons.
Absolutely.
And that, of course, is just an initial seed to the function, right? Because you want it to be iterative in nature. But understanding your priorities can help us bring examples back as they sort of shake down the system. We can maybe use some of those as test cases.
I just love to test all the different things we say as truths against the data, right? To understand we're really
absolutely
on the right
challenge
track.
our own assumptions.
That work with development and work in but actually have access to
yeah,
right. Opposed to trying to do that. So
totally.
It does always beg the question of what's the baseline.
Yeah.
That's because you're already you have a changing demographics, you're already changing the population. So I understand what's the clean baseline.
Yeah.
Okay, let's keep going.
Absolutely. Awesome. This is a little bit of an eye chart, but put some greater specificity on the slide that showed. This shows that the data in itself, it's not a hard line, based on when the data was collected. There is different degrees of data quality. What we have in the system at this point in time is data that we feel confident that is actually actionable, that we can, as we learn more, as we get more, and data quality program goes forward, this will start to even out and not have such a stagnant relative. And of course, moving forward, and I really apologize, but this is just an example. Here's some of the visualization. IBM Cognos is like Excel on steroids. So this is these are just 3 examples of very specific visualizations that we had generated for this system. The core chart is, I don't know how many of you are very familiar with it. It can be just ugly, but it can also be extremely important. So the user can take and set the parameters that they want. So if you are interested in seeing career pathways graduate takes, this represents graduate. So you can see you have a lot of electrical engineers. A lot of that same skill set go into consulting. A lot of them go way out in the left field, they'll actually go to education. But now's the time to laugh.
We got you.
But it really is impacted to show how people move throughout their career paths. Because I don't know about all of you, but I had no idea when I grew up. I still don't. spent 20 years at Intel, still don't know what I'm doing there. And it's very important to look at that and understand the motive. Education, now I'm on my soapbox, needs to keep up with the demand fields today. So what are the key skill sets? Key things people with education to allow them to be adaptive and have the basic skills to be nimble. Hopefully this will continue. Heat maps, based on the parameters that you set, the system will be able to produce heat maps. Granularity is fine, but it will show based on particular variable sets, a range of high performance versus, or if you were looking at Latino female that are taking advantage of STEM, see where there's high usage versus. That in and of itself is powerful because it gives you focus. Prove that. In the Sankey example, this is really Duncan Weiss did an awesome job. That was on your scene. This is a three-dimensional. So we'll be able to take and set the cohort, be able to set the year, and you'll be able to see what happens to that cohort.
Aren't we using the OBC example as case scenario to see if we can replicate it?
Yeah.
Unfortunately for that, you can see where they end up. You don't know why, sort of postulate why. It is interesting.
It's the first step in feeling the
Absolutely.
Just
ask them.
classes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. What their economic background were.
Let's see. This is just a blow up of the board. I need to spend time on this. But really represent what we spoke about before. This will be the first offering of interactive reports that so you'll be able to go onto a website. All of this is de-identified, aggregated, and user will set variables and dig down as far as honest communication, the reason it was chosen. The data is good. There's a lot of interest. So this would be the first public offering. We totally expect to increase this as we get more and more.
Public records, mock, and anybody, state, mom and dad be able to.
Yeah,
To a certain level.
To a certain level.
right now. They're most SLPSs throughout the country now are static shots. And that's what it is posted. This, the user will set the variables to a specific set.
Yeah, I think that that's something that we've talked about internally is that with this comes a tremendous opportunity for transparency and some drill downs for some great questions that will challenge the education system to respond in a way. It's like, well, look, Woodburn is graduating at X percent. How wonderful. What's it happening and why is it not working for other things? So it will, I think, generate a lot of conversation.
We see that same conversation with high school graduation. So it's very high level, but you get that same reaction, why is this such low in this one area compared to another area that has maybe the same demographic?
It'll be interesting.
Something that's intended, I think, for this.
From a budgetary standpoint, are you a one-man show?
No, because we're not. I have 3 technical and myself.
And you reside in the chief education office?
Just to give scale, I should have for staffing for SL, range 6. So we're way down our staff. Once it starts to become exercise, then we'll understand.
And this is something high on the governor's priority. And this, and a legislative session standpoint, is there a legislator or two that's extraordinarily up on this and it's a champion on this particular?
Yes.
And I was just curious because I'd like to strengthen the lobby a little bit about how important this is, and it would be important to understand who to push.
Power to truly transform how we think about the ecosystem. So the support certainly is very helpful.
Like you pick good software, custom breed kind of thing. Have you talked to the states that have been part of the leaders in this space that they're doing kind of move fast as opposed to learning?
Yes, very much so. We have a vendor that brought the system up. Will be self-sufficient. So our vendor feels but their program was educational, chief information officer for their SO. We brought him in. We've had conversations in Washington State, Arkansas, Colorado.
So you're learning the best
Tennessee,
practices.
Kentucky. It's interesting the scattergram of approach. States go from SLDSs that are preschool, higher ed. Some are preschool only. We're one of 3 states that have
Are you working with any of the
we pretty much figured this was big enough bite to take off first. Totally expect to expand to their.
Okay, let's keep going.
Got it. Further system development. Talked a little bit to this. I've got a 2 to 3 year timeline. Data inclusion. That's collapsing. Early learning will help in their development of their system. That is probably a year out. Development, probably a year out. Department of Human Services, OHA, entered an early agreement with those folks. That will probably be operational. Department of Correction, they came to us. Awesome. They want to see areas that we can put in the plan. What does the student profile look like? And are there commonality in their population? How that's teachers' standards and practices commission. We've got those folks. We're working early on in predictive models and modeling, and this goes to more access for public automated access. Then, of course, continuous improvement.
What attendance data?
Pardon?
Attendance data?
Yes. Questions? Before I open it up.
When it's going to go live? Sure, time.
Hard testing. Our researchers in Department of Ed, Higher Ed, and Workforce stress tests in January. We'll be rocking and rolling.
You should see us in March.
Yeah, we should schedule that now.
This, you're kind of coming to what?
BUT.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Being recorded. Appreciate that.
Data not crushed together there. Data quality spans from data that's questionable to extreme solid. It's going to take us time to get that data to where we have high.
Does the analytics
warn you about that? Does it give the thermometer on how warm or hot that data is?
Not until we. The feedback I've gotten from other states, Colorado took 2. It took them 3 years to share.
So there's no way to code the data as it's entered as.
Not until we start.
I do worry there is a gap without collecting the data on out of state college. Those could be your high performers, and they'll drop off from the data map. They may be STEM students too in that regard.
Very identity resolution. That will we have students that start school. Let's say like the last. Picking up like that kind of variability. So lack of really okay.
So it's not being looked at like social something.
Socials are just as fun.
Are they?
Yeah.
Cybersecurity can end up with 3 different social security numbers. It's like, well, okay, we probably
is listening.
We probably need to move on.
One request.
Okay.
Please, if you have a question relative to standards, that allows me to dry test the system. It identifies areas of cleaning. So just ask the question.
Yeah. If you could CC me on any of those requests or send them to me and I'll forward them to John. This goes for STEM council members, STEM hubs as well. Sort of the priority questions that you have in your work that such a system might address, or that we need to be thinking in terms of capacity in the future if we haven't. I know sort of in the STEM Beyond School, and we're going to ask those providers. That's an ongoing thing. We're not going to be able to answer some of that now, but
I may have missed it. But grades will be in there, and that's about it.
I'll have to point out. I believe it exists in some areas.
I'm just thinking about the big ones. ACT and SAT scores.
We will.
Okay, because that's some of our indicators as part of our STEM plan. Trying to get correlation.
We have to enter into.
Oh.
OD. I doesn't agree with that group, but it's not a for. So I have to go.
Okay, thank you, John. Great.
Thank you.
Looking forward to this, and I definitely want to schedule time in the first quarter and see what you learned, and maybe see some of those analytics that were
You
awesome.
got it.
Thank you very much. Hope the program stays funded. So.
That's what I think one of the biggest things we can do is just continue to shield this from anybody who doesn't want this data.
Can't imagine. Okay, public comments.
Funding capacity are always
We
a
do public
challenge.
comments now. or you-
Yeah, we can do public comments now, and then we'll move into the final
Right.
STEM plan
Maybe.
status. We do have Kimberly Herder, Project Lead the Way for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
Tireless advocate.
That's it. Well, I'm a product of you guys. So for those of you that don't know, my name is Kim Herder, and I work for a national nonprofit, Project Lead the Way, which is STEM curriculum. But I came from actually out of Health Science High School in Beaverton, where I was educator, administrator, and from a CTE revitalization grant is how I first became involved in STEM, and was eventually hired away by Project Lead the Way as we went into that going on. So I wasn't going to speak today. I know almost everybody in the room from different things, but I want to address a couple different questions that that Project Lead the Way is working with within the state, and then also nationally. So when it came to Measure 98 and the dual credit, how that's part of what's going on. So Oregon Institute of Technology, OIT in Klamath Falls, is our affiliate university in the state of Oregon. And dual credit is offered for all 3 pathways. Project Lead the Way has biomedical, computer science, and engineering. And those pathways, those classes are articulated with OIT. And the reason that we're a national organization and we're articulated with Stanford and Duke and MIT and RIT, and the reason we're at that level is so that exactly what happens in many states, an articulation with a community college can sometimes not transfer well within state and particularly out of state. So not having the articulation with OIT, not only are those classes articulated in with our universities, but also with those our other affiliate universities across the country, whether it's Stanford. So that's the addressing that that is happening in the state, and OIT is representing us with that on making that transfer. So I'm kind of jumping around, and then I come here with a challenge initiative. So Massachusetts is a Project Lead the Way is Massachusetts, and they are one of the few states who continue to support a STEM hub system. As you know, most states in the country have stepped away from that model. So I come with a challenge from Massachusetts because Massachusetts is number 1 in the nation when it comes to STEM education, and we hover not necessarily in those numbers, but it's a partnership where now Massachusetts is using Project Lead the Way, and has for many years, as the core curriculum within the classrooms for STEM education. And then the STEM hubs then work with, or it's done, my counterpart actually works within the STEM hub organization, and then allows the STEM hubs to do those things regionally that they would like to have done, being able to do the as we would call them, pocket excellence, and then be able to make those a higher level. So anyway, I come from with Massachusetts saying they would love to have us Oregon join them at the top of the ranks by being able to look at what they've done and over the last 20 years of their program, what worked and what didn't work, and to look at that and say, hey, instead of going from at the bottom third and working your way up, join us at the top and challenge us from the top, and we'll show you kind of what they're doing now. Actually, they've pushed PLTW to develop a pre-K program of curriculum. So now it will start in preschool, go through university, and then being able to have all the teachers in the state from kindergarten, they're focusing on 3rd grade, have the same STEM education, and know that every kiddo in the state is receiving this quality, systemic curriculum, and then for the STEM hubs to be able to say, okay, now we're looking at these particular. This is how they do it, and they're challenging us for us to join them and looking at what they're doing and not having to make mistakes that have been made across the country and be able to join them. So,
Thank you.
Very much.
So thanks.
All right, thank you. Let's look at that. It's a bit different. Nope, we don't. Anybody else signed up?
Okay, all right.
Somebody else wanted to do public comment.
Okay, so we did the last agenda item was looking at our 4 goals in terms of progress we're making. So I think in your packet.
Yeah, so rest this summary sheet here that people may have for those of you who are joining us. So I just want to show that sheet.
Sheet with the colors on it.
Right, the one with the colors on it.
With the 4 goals and kind of.
Yeah. What I did was to take the priority outcomes that are identified in the STEM strategic plan, the STEM education plan for Oregon, and try to give you just a marks update. I did not consult with our partners at ODE or the STEM hubs or the STEM investments, who may have a different sense of the status of green, red, yellow. I tried to think about, what was going on and are we on on target, on a glide pathway where we can say, this is going pretty well. Not to say that there's not more work to be done in any of those situations, but to try to say, hey, where have we not really moved the needle, if you will, on different areas or requires significant amount of additional attention. I think that we are seeing in the data, certainly in number 1, we're seeing in the data that those who are engaged meaningfully in STEM and CTE, applied learning courses and programs are graduating at a larger rate. They are engaged. We're seeing social emotional skills. I think that we need to do a lot more in terms of looking at the data, and so to John Starr's work earlier, I think there's more that we can do here. But all anecdotal data and the CTE data out of the Department of Education certainly indicates that we make a difference. How do we scale and spread? That's the matter there. What I'd like the council to be doing as we go quickly through this is to be thinking about ways that the council and the CTE STEM Employers Coalition and our business and industry partners can truly help alongside our agencies to make a difference in this regard. And I'd like that to become our agenda for the next year, then as we look at our subcommittee work and the work of this council, so that we focus it around how do we leverage the unique position of this council and within your spheres of influence to drive the work alongside the work that the Department of Ed and the HEC and others are doing, if that makes sense. For those of you who originally we were going to do breakout sessions and have small group conversations, for those of you in the room and on the phone, if you have some specific proposed actions that you would like to contribute and suggest, please send those to me around these areas, okay, so that I can get those out to the council as well. Number 2, I think I mentioned the Oregon Science Project previously. I think there's amazing work that Susan and Jamie and others in the state are having in terms of professional development. We know that this is one of those areas that is critical, and that very few of our elementary schools are doing this in a systemic fashion. And I think that there's ripe opportunity for us to expand our efforts in that regard. You'd say that's true, Susan?
I just kind of say one thing that just on the last quarter, the science on there at this may continue. We are trying.
Yeah, and it is certainly one of our indicators, so I'm not sure why it wasn't on John's chart, because he has flagged all of our indicators as.
A quick note that we call out science and engineering separately, which is good in the sense that they're both very important subjects. The Oregon science standards do include both science and engineering within those same standards. So us all up to speed. If they do mandated science, that would include it.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're getting at the question of proposed actions on it, not to go down too much money, but who controls the hours? The Department of Education, who decides that we can only affect what we know can change the system. So where is those decisions made on?
It's the teachers. They're done at a local level. Building principals oftentimes have the most control over what classroom educators at the elementary school, how they prioritize their time. Superintendents have a little, depending on the size of the district, have some influence, but not as much as you would think. I think in smaller districts, yes, but not in larger districts. I think that there's some work that OHSU has been convening with Susan Sugarman, has been convening a thought leaders group with a number of people around STEM education over the years, and they wrote a letter to, alongside the Oregon Science Teachers Association, wrote a letter to Salam Noor to ensure that this was part of the state ESSA plan. So I think there's additional advocacy that could be done to prioritize this, from the state and additional leadership. But I think the more that we can support the State Board of Education in terms of calling on this and having, it really emphasized, I think that would be a good thing. Number 3, computer science standards. I think there's a lot of work being done around the frameworks and CS for All, and there's a lot more CTE programs of study that have been established in computer science. I think we're on track for that. Whether or not the state, there's a whole different process around adopting standards. I think this is green because the work that we are doing, whether or not we have state standards, specific standards or not, the work is happening anyway. So I'm really pleased by the focus that's happening here, both within our own STEM grant and then some additional grants that organizations have gotten.
On that point, on our digital literacy grants, did that get pushed out to the entire system right now? It's being designed.
Yes, I mean that's they're working with the STEM hubs and with some regional computer science coordinators to try to promote this. They have a playbook that has been built to work with superintendents and curriculum directors and principals for steps that they can take and to then connect to CTE programs of study and to develop those. So I think that there's a lot there. There's still a lot of work to be done, but there's momentum there, and it's going, I think, pretty well for all. High quality after school STEM programs by at least 25% increase, particularly for those underserved and underrepresented. STEM Beyond School, and then the great work that Oregon Ask has been doing to prioritize and showcase STEM in the after school setting. Again, this is a critical area that we need to continue to prioritize. The short-term gains we can work at turning the huge battleship of the school system. The after-school setting is nimble. There's a lot of great programming. We need to continue to focus on quality and to fund advocacy efforts and also coordination efforts to bring greater alignment there. But I'm not overly concerned. It's good to see that, and of course it needs more resources and more attention, but I think we're on track there.
I didn't recall. Is John collecting data on this? No, we're not getting any data on out of school.
Not currently, but I know the STEM Beyond School folks have worked with the Department of Ed to get their data in terms of aligning and reporting against those students who have participated. So they've been doing work there already. So
obviously interested. It's just
absolutely. And Saturday Academy and Girls Inc. and others are all very interested in doing it. So how can we do this as a systems level would be a conversation for this coming year. Number 2, around equity, I think that for me, even though we've had a lot of some attention to this, this is an area that needs us to step in much more strongly, I think. Yeah.
Only those things that are very specifically difficult. We're gonna have to start figuring out what metrics that we need to hold the hubs and ourselves accountable to in regards to simple things, the number of outreaches we're doing on whatever we're meant to place. I think we have to start to require this as a base level of performance as opposed to hoping that it
right.
So I think it's one of those things that it's just a lot of people don't know how to get started, or they don't know again what tactics to use, or whatever the case may be. And we're going to have to build a carrot and stick.
Yeah,
I agree. The other day, I look at all these.
They were in my initial thing. I changed them to yellow because I was hopeful about some of the work that we've been doing.
Supports with heritage, but at the end of the day, lack of current data really. If I said that there was $1 billion for someone that did this work, I bet there'd be metrics like coming out of many places to get it to happen, right? And climbing all over the bill, figure out how to participate.
Yeah. I mean, if we simply had, for number one, a requirement to reach out to 10 companies per month, and one of the questions you must ask every company you reach into is, do you have any resources associated with color as act as role models? And and we just measure it. Because I think the activity is just not occurring necessarily consistently. It may occur sporadically. I think we have to put pressure to mapping it.
Yeah.
Well, in GPI, Greater Portland Inc. just did a survey. They got an equity effort in their organization, which has identified leaders, people of color and poverty, to try creating that network. Partners in Diversity is another group that we work with on that in terms of trying to figure out how to bring it together.
I think having our diversity subcommittee connect with CT Employers Coalition, talk more specifically about the rate. I can certainly work with Ben and John and the Department of Ed around number 2 and 3, around getting the data.
Well, but I'm going to follow up on him because being part of that CPI thing, I actually know that they haven't quite did it. And it's common that they don't know how to do it. At what point do you actually start helping figure that out?
Yeah.
And is that a STEM investment thing? Is that an education thing? Is it a larger issue? I mean, I can tell you this is part of what you have to go into a lot of work. Not a quick thing, but it's an active right together. Until there's like really getting back to number one, there's no concerted effort. Then it falls on individuals to try to figure out how to do it themselves. You don't get.
So the other question would be in regards to allocation of resources. To lay it on top of the structure. But again, if you have a point in my business anywhere we're failing, we don't just tell the managers that are already failing to suddenly improve. Generally, carve off an additional dedicated resource to these traineeship. I mean, is that something that we consider looking at in regards to hiring somebody who takes this as a project, their sole thing to drive this work?
I think that would be a very interesting suggestion to.
And I can't imagine it when a flight goal being shot down. I mean, it sounds like we're trying. We have to have a defined solution and proposal, but if we do our diligence there, we should.
Does the state have?
Certainly within the Department of Ed, and there's within the governor's office, we also have to be a place where we can start trying to get some resource allocation
To leverage them.
We often get things with society. Kind of pros, Blue Square, communities are already galvanizing together. I wonder about resources for those societies, which are often entirely volunteer after my real job sort of opportunities for them, to have them drive how they might have those. Just thinking another
I think
predominantly likely white person, like, hey,
yeah.
I don't know.
Well, for me, it's not. I want to rely on volunteers, right? But you can't rely on volunteers. If it's really that important, the only way you're going to get the level of performance of somebody's dedicated in their job and their success is all based on that moment.
It has to be both that the point at which that person or that are part of the establishment really can't. There is a handle that well, but it's often the case that folks doing that, like Banning Pro, don't have a base person on you that specific resources to help them. So if they say we can get these people in a room like over a month period, one day, once we can actually move them. It just but there's no input.
Seems like a couple $100,000 very well spent.
Also look at some of the national associations that are professional associations that are there.
I know one of the challenges we do our outreach with teachers and they hear all of the time. They don't know.
Yeah.
So there's an educational component. I want to leverage it.
All right.
Okay. Yeah. So let's start this for additional attention to this coming year about how to identify that resources. They ask forward. Around our educators, again, professional development for our educators, we have very few resources that are specifically earmarked for educator professional development. We have been doing through our grants, like the Math in Real Life and some of the resources coming out of the STEM hubs where people have posted to the different areas. Tom, do you want to mention some of the sort of the numbers of lessons and things where they are going?
Yeah. So we had one. I have to go through it together now. It's about 100 lessons. Ranges of things. Teaching.
Yeah.
And lessons range from focus. Also, or science connection.
It's the incentive for a teacher to spend their off hours reorganizing and putting everything up on these resources.
I think they do it anyway. I think one of the things that we have to do is to try to create some additional connections for educators to know that those resources exist, and then also to encourage and incentivize people to post.
Well, that's it. Well, I'm asking what's the incentive? I mean, it's extra work. You're asking. I just know too many teachers are like, hey, I get home after correcting all, I just want to have a beer and watch TV. I'm not going to be posting.
To be honest, people that are participating in our coalition and really feel like it. And have requirement to use product. Very good job. Now, but that's the point. Question.
Yeah. So I'm going to move us quickly beyond this in the interest of time. We've already talked about the critical role of leadership. That's something that's being prioritized. Again, a lot more can be done there, and there's a lot of innovative solutions. I think connecting business industry alongside education leaders is something that we've talked about in terms of doing some regional outreach. So that would be an opportunity there. PD, we already spoke just briefly about. Number 4, in terms of the sustainable and supportive conditions, this is a critical place for this council, as well as STEM and CT Employers Coalition is concerned, for us to look at our policy agenda going forward. not only in the short session, but preparing, laying the foundation for the longer term session there about what we do to increase our not only our funding, but to also advocate for policies that can incentivize business and industry to work alongside educators. We're talking in terms of revenue packages, et cetera. There's a lot of more work that can be done here, I think. Yeah. So thank you again. What I would ask the council to be thinking about, and please get to me your ideas and suggestions for creating our work plan for this coming year. This has been an ongoing ask. I've received a couple of comments, but I'd like much more specific guidance about what you would like to see going forward. I recently sent you a calendar of proposed STEM Council meetings. Please take a look at those dates and locations. Moving this council meeting to go between Portland, Eugene, Bend, and Salem over the coming year as a recommendation, and to couple site visits alongside that. If there's an opportunity to meet on the fringes of those metropolitan areas as well, I'm very, if you're open to it, I'm open to it, and I think that we could get some very interesting site visits, like if we went to Culver and looked at some of the work that they're doing, or specifically around some of the work. Even Ontario would be wonderful to go visit. I know that those folks would be very interested in having us come out that direction. So I know that poses additional constraints on people's travel. And
find a board member with a plane.
A board member with a plane, yeah, that's right. Okay, any additional questions or thoughts from this council?
Okay, good meeting. It's the end of the year. Again, I want to thank Mark for all his work in leadership in the area. Hopefully we'll have a full council next time we get back together.
Are we, in that regard, my head count, if we're adding 2 or minusing 2, at that same basic flip at that point?
We'll have 9.
Will that be 9? Will we be at 9?
And we're, yes.
And are we looking for?
Lose 2, we gain 2, right?
Or yeah, that's what I thought.
But we've lost 1. Thompson, and we had an empty seat.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm just looking for understanding.
That. Okay, Dwayne's going to stay on for a while. That's
right. Because again, I think the part of the suggestion in regards to the April event is to start to formulate and build a better, stronger pool of industry leaders to be able to know where we're going 6 months from now, a year from now.
And it would be wonderful to be bringing people on as sort of adjunct members for a while to shadow the work, so that we're not starting and stopping, that we're getting continuity. So as you look at your own networks and individuals across the state, if you could find, for those who are interested in transitioning this year, to identify some individuals, that would be great.
I still have a big proposal to go after one, but it can't be done by me. It's got to be done by people above us.
Yeah, absolutely.
The right call would do it, but
let me know who's the right call, and I'll work on that happening.
Okay.
Thank you all, and for those on the audience, again, if you have suggestions and ideas and any questions that have been stimulated by these conversations, let me know.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Meeting's adjourned.